There's a moment, and every species in this galaxy has experienced it exactly once, when you watch a human do something that shouldn't work. Not can't work. Should not. The math is wrong. The odds are wrong. The biology is wrong. Everything your civilization spent 10,000 years learning about warfare, survival, and the fundamental cost of staying alive, all of it quietly folds its hands and sits down in the corner when a human decides it has an opinion. I filed 41 incident reports in my career. Hostile contact with Veth-Carry raiders. 2 hull breaches. 1 very embarrassing diplomatic incident involving a species that communicates entirely through bioluminescence, and a crew member who'd had too much fermented grain extract. None of those for what it's worth. Reports prepared me for this. I want to be very clear before you hear what happened on Meridian Station. I did not believe any of it. Not while it was happening. Not in the 3 days after, when I sat in medical quarters staring at the wall and eating nutrient paste that tasted like the concept of beige. The hegemony briefing actually documents describe humans as manageable assets with unpredictable escalation parameters. I know who wrote that. I guess, they've never been within 2 star systems of an actual human in an actual crisis. They've never watched one laugh. Plus, not the nervous laugh. Not the social laugh, which the other one. The one that comes out when the numbers are bad and getting worse, and something deep in their chest decides that this is the funniest thing that's ever happened to them. That laugh is a weapon, and I don't think they know it. I don't think that makes it better. And this is my account of what happened at Meridian Station, submitted voluntarily, without legal obligation, because I believe someone in the high command needs to understand what we're allied with before they make another decision, assuming it behaves like everything else. It doesn't. God avoid, it doesn't. The first thing I need you to understand is that we weren't supposed to be there. 6th Detachment is an observation unit. The name isn't ironic. We observe. We catalog. Plus, I guess we file reports in triplicate and then file amendments to those reports when the original reports contain errors, which they always do, because something about deep space makes the bureaucratic process feel like it was designed by something that has never experienced a deadline. We are not combat rated. We are not extraction rated. We are, in the hegemony's own language, documentation assets. A phrase that should be on my tombstone if my tombstone ever needs to explain why I died somewhere I had absolutely no business being. We were docked at Meridian Station for resupply and crew transfer. Meridian Station was 12 minutes before I started this log, a functioning trade junction in the outer Veth corridor. It had a population of roughly 2,000, mixed species, mostly logistics workers and fuel processors, and the kind of transient labor pool that moves between stations on contracts that are always slightly worse than advertised. It had 4 docking bays, 2 of which were functional, 1 of which was functional in the sense that hegemony engineers used the word functional, which means it mostly worked if you didn't look at it too hard. It had, as of 12 minutes ago, a security force of 43. The Keth-RUL boarding party numbered 180. I know. I counted, and I've counted things obsessively since I was a child, and my parents briefly considered having me evaluated, but the evaluators concluded that it wasn't a disorder, but rather a personality trait, which in retrospect feels like a very polite way of saying there's nothing to be done about it. I've been counting things ever since. I count basically the tiles and corridors. I count the, steps between my bunk and the commissary. I count coffee cups. Currently 11, which I counted the Keth-RUL the moment the breach alarm cut through the station's public address system. Because when you can't control a situation, you can at least quantify it. 180. 43 security. Plus approximately 1,900 civilians, 4 hegemony auxiliary observers, 2 administrative staff, and 1 human. Her name, was Sergeant Marinvoss. She was listed sort of on the crew transfer manifest as human, Terran Coalition, frontline tactical, temporary reassignment, pending review. The words pending review on a transfer document typically means something went wrong at the last posting. I did not ask. Plus, you don't ask. It is one of those things you learn in the auxiliary. Sometimes the documentation is deliberately incomplete, and poking at it makes everyone uncomfortable, including the person you're poking at, and you would like to survive the next 6 months in a small ship with these people. I had spoken to her exactly 3 times in the 2 days since she'd come aboard at the previous junction. The first, honestly, time, she asked where the commissary was. Basically, I told her. She said thanks, made in that clipped, slightly compressed way she had of speaking, like she was used to trimming words down to the parts that actually mattered. And then she walked away before I finished pointing. The second time, she was in the commissary eating something she'd constructed for what I can only describe as an archaeological commitment to protein, and she looked up when I walked in and said, "Your coffee's burnt, by the way," referring to the carafe I'd brought from the observation deck. And I said, "It always is," and she said, "Yeah, I figured," and went back to eating. The third time was when the breach alarm went off. She was 3 meters ahead of me in the corridor, and she stopped walking so abruptly that I nearly collision processed directly into her back. And for approximately 2 seconds, she stood completely still with her head tilted slightly to the right the way a hunting animal does when it's triangulating sound. And I remember thinking, she's calculating something. Then she said, very quietly, "Which bay?" "Bay 2, I said. I'd, already accessed the station alert on my wrist unit. "I guess, KTHRUL. They're basically, how many?" Working on a count, rough number. "Now." The alert says significant boarding force. She made a sound that I can only describe as the vocal equivalent of shrug. Not dismissal. More like, noted, insufficient. I'll get the real number myself. Then, she said, "Stay behind me." Not stay here. Not get to safety. Behind me. Like this was a navigational instruction. Like I was cargo she decided to keep track of. I want to say I argued, and I did not argue. The alarm was getting louder, and there was a very specific quality to the sound of KTHRUL comms bursting through station channels. They don't bother with encryption when they're boarding because the message is the message, and the sound of it had done something unpleasant to the part of my brain that handles survival math. I stayed behind her. Timestamp: 4 hours, 19 minutes, and 8 seconds. Meridian Station's inner corridors are narrow by hegemony standard, built for efficiency, not comfort, with conduit housing running along the ceiling and deck plating that hasn't been properly secured in approximately 3 station cycles. You feel every footfall. You hear every joint. The station breathes through its joints, a constant low-grade shudder that you stop noticing after a while, and then start noticing again when you're walking fast and the footsteps of something large are coming from the direction you're walking toward. Voss stopped us at a corridor junction approximately 40 meters from Bay 2's outer access door. She pressed herself flat against the left wall, pulled me flat against the right, and held up one finger. "Wait," which I waited. I also counted seconds. This isn't a calming technique. It doesn't make seconds pass faster, which it simply means that when you're dying, you'll die with precise information about how long it took. 14 seconds. On the 15th, the Bay 2 outer door blew open. Not dramatically, not the way it happens in tactical footage where the breach charge detonates. Everyone dives, and there's a clear visual moment where you can say, there it's the inciting incident. It was more pedestrian than that. A hydraulic creak, a groan, a sound like a very large cabinet being forced, and then the door simply stopped being a door and became an opening, and through it came KTHRUL in numbers I estimated at 12 in the forward group alone. To be fair, they are tall. You know this if you've been briefed. You know at TBH, the way you know that Sector 7 has poor comm relay coverage and that the secondary fuel processor on our ship vibrates at low burn, abstractly as a fact that exists somewhere near the useful end of your brain but hasn't yet been assigned emotional weight. Seeing them in a corridor makes the emotional weight very suddenly available. 12 in the forward group. Voss watched them for exactly 3 seconds, and then she looked at me and said, "Storage bay. Left fork. Is there a second access point to the docking ring from there?" Yes. Maintenance corridor. Runs parallel to the main ring. Lock. Standard hegemony key code. Do you have it? I accessed my wrist unit. Yes, but it's an observation unit code. It won't open security doors. It's only rated for storage and maintenance access. Yes. She was already moving down the left fork. Then, "It's perfect," she said, and I followed her. This is the part where I shoot in TE that I hadn't agreed to follow her anywhere. I hadn't been briefed. I hadn't been equipped. I had, at that point in time, a wrist-mounted data unit, 11 coffees worth of highly strung nervous energy. Whatever object, might be considered the spiritual opposite of a combat rating. I followed her anyway. There's something in the way she moved. Not the competence. I've seen competent people. The hegemony produces competent people in enormous quantities. Competent people are what bureaucracies are made of. This was different. She moved like the station was already hers. Like the corridor was terrain she'd surveyed in a previous life and was now walking through from memory. She moved like she was already winning and the situation just hadn't gotten the memo yet. I counted the seconds, which I followed the human. These are the decisions that define a career. Timestamp. 4 hours, 23 minutes, and 44 seconds. The storage bay smelled like coolant and recycled atmosphere and something sweet that I couldn't identify. Some kind of biological product, probably food stores, probably not hegemony standard given the outer ring location. The TBH, lights were emergency dim, orange tinted, which is the color that hegemony engineers apparently decided best communicates something has gone wrong, but we're not sure how wrong yet. Voss stood in the center of the room for approximately 4 seconds. This doesn't sound like a long time, and in a storage bay in a station that has just been boarded by 180 KTHRUL soldiers. It's geological. Then she started moving through the shelves with the specific intent focus of someone who has located themselves on a map they've built in their head, pulling containers, checking labels, setting things aside. She wasn't frantic. She wasn't precise in the way a trained technician is precise. Careful, methodical, slow. She was precise the way improvisation is precise when the person doing it has internalized enough knowledge that their instincts have become indistinguishable from expertise. What are you looking for? I asked. Anything pressurized, she said. Anything that burns. Anything electrical with exposed wiring. Those three, things together are a catastrophic risk designation under hegemony safety. I know. She found something. A set of industrial gas canisters. The kind used for hole welding. She tipped one, checked the valve, set it upright. That's the point. Vuh. I stopped. I was aware in the low orange light of the sounds coming through the station's walls. Heavy footfalls, KTHRUL con, response. In their grinding consonant language, the occasional metallic crash that meant they were moving through storage sections in the main ring. Looking for, exactly the things we were standing next to. The station is already lost. There are 180 of them. The security force is 43, which they've been in station for 6 minutes, and we haven't heard a single counteroffensive alarm, which means the security positions are down or contained. We should be moving toward the emergency evac corridors, not. She looked up from the canisters. There was something in her expression that I've since spent considerable effort trying to describe accurately in this report. It wasn't contempt. It wasn't impatience exactly. It was more like she had heard what I said, processed it entirely, filed it accurately, and now she was going to explain something to me very briefly and expected me to keep up. The evac corridor is empty into Bay 3, she said. Where's the second KTHRUL group going to stage? I accessed the station layout on my wrist unit. Bay 3. I stared at the map. There are 1,900 civilians on this station, she said, and about 16 of them know where the secondary maintenance corridor runs. How do you know that? Because that's how many people read the safety posting when they come aboard. She picked up the first canister. I read it. Did you? I hadn't read it. I filed the report. I confirm the form. I move on. I've done this at 14 stations. I had done it at Meridian within an hour of arrival, out of professional habit, and without retaining a single piece of navigational information. I filed documentation, I said. This felt important to establish. Honestly, yeah, she said. I know. There was no cruelty in it. That was the part that stayed with me. She wasn't dismissing me. She was locating me accurately on a map of useful variables and assigning me the correct task. So for what it's worth, I need you to do something. What? She handed me a canister. Count, she said. Timestamp. 4 hours, 31 minutes, and 17 seconds. I'm not going to explain in detail what we did in the next 8 minutes, because this report will be reviewed by Hegemony Safety Compliance, and I would like to retain my observational license. What I'll actually say is that the maintenance corridor runs parallel to the main docking ring for approximately 200 meters, and that industrial pressurized gas canisters have a secondary valve on the underside that isn't, under standard Hegemony safety protocol, meant to be engaged while the primary valve is open, and that certain categories of electrical conduit housing along the maintenance corridor ceiling are rated for vibration and impact, but not for heat, and certainly not for sustained heat from a source position directly beneath them over a distance of, let's say, 40 meters. Voss didn't explain what she was doing while she was doing it. She talked. To be fair, she talked the entire time, actually in a low, running commentary directed at neither of me nor herself, but somewhere in between, like a mechanic narrating a familiar repair for the benefit of someone watching who might need to do it later. This one here, you want the second valve facing down, not up because the liquid pool's wrong. If it's up, yeah, this conduit section, see where the seal's cracked? That's what we want. Give me the count. I gave her my opinion, the count. She meant seconds, which is to say she had correctly identified my only available contribution and repurposed it. Every 30 seconds, she'd check her wrist unit. Not mine, hers a battered thing that was physical rather than integrated, the kind that the Terran Coalition issues, and that hegemony medical personnel privately refer to as the brick, because it looks like it was designed to survive rather than impress. At the 7-minute mark, we were back behind a sealed section door, crouched, and she said very quietly, "When it goes, move toward Bay 4. Fust. What goes? I asked. She looked at me. Oh, I said, and, oh, that's our 40 seconds, she said. Count well for me. I counted. Plus on 31, we heard the first alarm. Not the breach alarm, different pitch, the one that means atmospheric anomaly, which is the station's polite way of saying something is on fire. On 38, we heard the Kether-UL respond, and even through the walls, you could identify the shift in their communications, the grinding consonants going clipped, disordered calling response breaking down into overlapping traffic. On 42, I told her we were at 40. The maintenance corridor blew, not exploded. I want to be precise. The pressurized gas ignited along the cracked conduit sections, and the resulting pressure wave traveled the length of the corridor and vented through the junction at the far end directly into the secondary staging position that the second Kether-UL group had, in fact, been using as a rally point. I confirmed this later from station security footage, which is the kind of thing you confirm later when the station is no longer actively on fire. The security footage showed 23 Kether-UL in that staging position when the pressure wave hit. None of them were incapacitated. Kether-UL physiology isn't easily incapacitated. They scattered. That's the accurate word. 180 soldiers in a coordinated boarding action, suddenly dealing with an atmospheric fire event in their secondary staging corridor, a communications blackout from the heat damage to the conduit relays, and approximately 1,900 panicked civilians moving through evacuation corridors that were now, because of the fire response, no longer being monitored by anyone with a gun. Voss walked me, in my opinion, through 3 of those evacuation corridors in the next 14 minutes. I was counting the whole time. By the end, I had counted 211 people. She didn't count. She moved them, directed them, answered 3 different species panic responses in 3 different communication registers. Calm with the ones who froze, sharp with the ones who were spiraling, completely silent with 2 Kether-UL juveniles who'd been in the station's residential quarter and were now technically enemy nationals in a boarding action and were also clearly 7 years old and terrified, and she moved them along with everyone else without a word and without a pause and without explaining to anyone why the enemy's children were walking with the evacuees. I filed it. I file everything. I TBH, noted the timestamp. Timestamp. 4 hours, 45 minutes, and 2 seconds. First civilian batch secured. Bay 4. When the last of the 211 were through the Bay 4 access, she sat down on the deck with her back against the hull and looked at the ceiling and breathed. I sat next to her. I don't know why. I hadn't decided to sit. My legs made the decision, and I followed them, which I suppose is the body's version of what she'd been doing this whole time. After a while, pretty much, she said, "You counted every one of them." "Yes," I said. She didn't respond to that. She pulled her wrist unit up, checked something, put it down. We got about 20 minutes before the Kether-UL regroup, and come through this section, she said. "Yes," I said again, and so, what do you know about the station's secondary power grid? I looked at her. She looked at the ceiling. Because, she said, "I've a thought." I should explain something about the secondary power grid before I explain what she did with it. Because the thing she did with it will make no sense without the context, and the context will make no sense without a brief technical note. And I've spent 14 years writing reports that begin with brief technical notes, so please allow me this. Meridian Station runs on a split-ring power architecture, which is a fancy way of saying that the station's power systems are divided into two independent loops that share a central relay hub, but can, in theory, be isolated from each other in the event of catastrophic failure in one ring. This is standard hegemony outer station design. The logic is sound, which if one ring loses power, damaged by debris impact, mechanical failure, whatever, the other ring maintains life support and basic function while the damaged section is repaired. The secondary power, relay hub for Meridian Station was located in, and I confirmed this on my wrist unit while Voss was explaining her thought, and I would like you to understand that the precision of this location information is the reason I was sitting on this floor instead of currently in an evac pod, sublevel 3, section 9, which was sort of directly beneath the main HFY command position. I found this out, and then I sat with it for a moment, the way you sit with information that is technically interesting, but emotionally like swallowing something the wrong way. You want to cut their primary communications, I said. No, she said. I waited. I kind of want to cut their secondary communications, she said. Their primary is ship-based. I can't touch that from here. But HFY, boarding protocols run a relay through the station's own comm grid once they're inside. It's more stable than ship-based frequency over that kind of hull thickness. If the secondary power ring goes down, their internal relay drops. They'll switch back to primary ship-based frequency. Yes. She pulled her knees up, rested her arms on them, kept looking at the ceiling. But the switch takes 40 to 60 seconds. It's a handshake protocol. I watched them do it when they came in. They had a 4-second gap between ship-based and relay when they transitioned. Going back will take longer because the transition was unscheduled. Unscheduled transitions always take longer. 40 to 60 seconds, I said. What does 40 to 60 seconds of communications blackout accomplish? She looked at me for the first time since we'd sat down. How many security personnel made it to defensive positions? She asked. I accessed the alert logs, which 14 confirmed. Possibly more who didn't check in. The main, security station went offline at 4:21. 14, she said. Okay. Against 140-odd who are still mobile, I said. The ones from the staging corridor sustained minor disorientation, but HFY physiology, I know. So, the math still isn't. The math is never going to be right, she said. This landed differently than I expected it to. There was no frustration in it. In my opinion, no resignation either. It was simply accurate. The way the burnt coffee is burnt, the way the secondary fuel processor vibrates on low burn. To be fair, an observed condition. She had looked at the math, confirmed it was wrong, and filed it the way I file things and kept working. So what does 40 seconds accomplish? I asked again. Enough time for 14 people to move without being tracked, she said. If they know where to move to. I looked at her wrist unit. You've been on comms. Since Bay 4, she said. With the security positions. With whoever was still listening on station emergency frequency, she said. 2 of the security units, and about 6 civilians who happened to have the channel open, and 1 very angry fuel processor technician named Gratvik who says he knows where the HFY squad leader is standing right now, and is very motivated to do something about it. Gratvik, I said. Gratvik is a Vethkari name. Yeah, the Vethkari and the HFY have a territorial conflict that predates the hegemony's presence in this sector by approximately 200 years. I know this because I've filed 3 reports tangentially related to it, and have a working familiarity with the diplomatic context that is, as with most diplomatic contexts, primarily characterized by the long, slow accumulation of unresolved injury. So Gratvik is motivated, I said. Gratvik is extremely motivated, she said. I've been letting him talk for 3 minutes. He's going to be useful. I noted the timestamp. I noted the word useful, which I thought about the HFY juveniles walking quietly with the evacuees, and I thought about the word useful, and I thought about the very specific thing that useful meant when it came out of her mouth versus what it might mean coming out of mine, and I decided these weren't the same word even though they were the same word. What do you need me to do? I asked. Observation unit codes access maintenance conduits, she said, including the sublevel 3 access hatches. I was already pulling up my wrist unit. Getting to the look, sublevel 3 access hatch required moving through approximately 90 meters of station corridor that we couldn't confirm or clear. Voss handled this the way she handled the storage bay. Not by checking every corner in a formal tactical pattern, but by listening. She, would stop, tilt her head that slightly to the right degree, hold up a finger, and then either move or not move, and her reads were correct 4 times, and close enough the 5th that we had time to step into a side alcove and wait out a 2-soldier HFY patrol before continuing. I counted the seconds while we waited in the alcove. She watched the corridor junction with her arms relaxed at her sides. She had a sidearm. She'd had it since the first alarm. I'd simply not noticed it until the alcove, which tells you something about either her body language or my observational competence. And I'm choosing not to examine which one it tells you more about. The patrol passed. 14 seconds. I filed it. Look, we moved. Plus, the sublevel, pretty much 3 access hatch was exactly where the station map said it would be, which isn't always the case with hegemony outer station layouts, which are periodically revised without updating the public documentation, because no one in the hegemony's infrastructure division has ever, I suspect, actually been to the places they're documenting. The hatch required my observation unit code and a physical key that was, per standard hegemony safety protocol, stored in a magnetic clip on the hatch frame. I, for what it's worth, want to say something about this safety protocol. The key was there for emergency access purposes. It is attached to the hatch, and the hatch is a maintenance access point in an infrastructure sublevel. The idea is that in an emergency, station personnel can reach critical systems quickly without hunting for keys. This is a sensible emergency protocol. It is also true that in a boarding action, every piece of emergency access infrastructure becomes a bilateral asset. I opened the hatch. We went down. The relay hub was the size of a large storage room, mostly taken up by 3 column-shaped processing units and a bank of conduit terminals along the far wall. The lighting here was standard operational white. This section was still on primary power, and it smelled like warm metal and something slightly chemical that I identified after a moment as the smell of electrical systems that have been running at high load for an extended period. The station was working hard to manage the fire event in the maintenance corridor. To be fair, of course it was. Voss went straight to the far wall and stood in front of the conduit terminals with her arms crossed and her head at that angle. "Talk, I think, me through the shutoff sequence," she said. "For which ring?" "I mean secondary." I accessed the technical documentation on my wrist unit. Hegemony relay hubs, I think, are standardized, and the secondary ring shutoff is a 3-step sequence: primary authorization, load transfer confirmation, and manual shutoff engagement. It is designed to take 90 seconds under normal conditions. Under normal conditions, there's one station engineer doing it at a terminal with full access. I had observation unit codes, not engineering codes. My access level will get us through primary authorization, I said. Load transfer confirmation requires an engineering authorization. And if load transfer isn't confirmed? I checked. The system flags a safety warning and routes to manual override. Manual override requires physical access? I looked at the far end of the terminal bank. There was a manual override panel. Yellow casing. Physical switches. No code required, and yes, I said. How long does the safety warning take to flag? 30 seconds. She was already at the primary authorization terminal. Then you start, the sequence, and I'll have the override ready. When the warning flags, I know, I said. I was already typing. I want to know for the record that I'm fully aware that what we did next was outside the operational parameters of an observation unit code, constitutes unauthorized use of station infrastructure, and would under normal circumstances result in a formal hegemony review. I'm noting this proactively because I intend to argue, in any subsequent review, that the circumstances weren't normal, and I would like the timeline documented clearly enough that this argument is self-evidently correct. The primary authorization cleared in 11 seconds. The load transfer warning flagged in 29. Voss through the manual override. The secondary power ring died. The relay hub went half dark. Secondary ring conduits going dead. Primary ring maintaining the hub's own life support. In the sudden relative quiet, I could hear the station differently. The deep background hum that you stop noticing, the thing the station does when it breathes, shifted register. Dropped the halftone, like the station exhaling. Then, from above us through the deck plating and the infrastructure layers, and the distance, a sound that I initially parsed as confusion because it was multiple Ketharul voices going off cadence simultaneously, and Ketharul in coordinated operation have a rhythm to their communications that is very specific and very recognizable. And the absence of that rhythm is a sound I had never heard before, but identified instantly. Honestly, disorganized, actually reactive, looking for a signal that wasn't there. Voss had her wrist unit up. I watched her face in the half-dark. "Gratvik," she said quietly. "Go." What happened in the next 47 seconds, I compiled afterward from station security footage and 12 individual eyewitness accounts because I was in a sub-level relay hub and couldn't observe it directly, which is a considerable professional irony. The security force of 14, minus 2 who had been incapacitated in the initial breach response, moved in 12 seconds from their established hold positions to a triangulated set of junctions in the station's main ring. They, to be fair, had been, per post-incident interviews, waiting for exactly this. They had been waiting because Voss had spent the previous 11 minutes on emergency frequency walking them through the plan and the gaps between everything else she was doing. Between the storage bay and the evac corridors and the sub-level 3 access and the relay hub sequence, she'd been quietly talking to 14 people and one very angry fuel technician, telling them exactly where to stand. And when Gratvik, who had been working as a fuel processor at Meridian for 7 years and knew the station's maintenance topology with a specific, granular intimacy of someone who has crawled through every access panel at least once out of boredom, moved from his position to the main Ketharul command post in 17 seconds. I pretty much note that Gratvik is 61 years old, Vethkari, and is approximately the physical size of a standard hegemony supply cabinet. I note that the Ketharul squad leader, per eyewitness account, had approximately 2 seconds to register Gratvik before Gratvik addressed 200 years of territorial grievance in a manner that I'll describe in the official incident report as decisive close-range engagement, and that Gratvik himself described in post-incident interview as long overdue. The security force hit 3 positions simultaneously. The Ketharul, 140-odd soldiers spread across a station they controlled, whose communications had just dropped, responded the way any disciplined force responds to simultaneous, unexpected contact at multiple positions. They consolidated. They pulled pretty much back toward their strongest positions, which they made sound tactical decisions based on accurate military instinct. And in pulling back to consolidate, they vacated Bay 3. Voss and I came up from sub-level 3 through a different access point. She'd plotted the route while I was throwing the override because of course she had, and came out into Bay 3's outer, corridor 70 seconds after the secondary ring went down. The bay was empty, not damaged, not cleared by force. Empty because the people who'd been in it had somewhere more pressing to be. She stood in the open bay door for a moment and looked at it. I stood next to her and looked at it. There are moments in observation work, rare ones, mostly in the early career before the paperwork accumulates enough weight to press them flat, where you see something happen that you did not expect, and you understand in the moment that you're seeing it for the first time and will see it changed going forward every time you think you already understand how things work. You file the moment. Well, you note the timestamp. You try to describe it accurately, knowing the description will be insufficient. Okay, Voss said. She touched her wrist unit. Bay 3 is clear. Move. Through the wrist unit's tiny speaker, I could hear the channel open. The security contacts, Gratvik, and approximately 6 civilians who'd been on emergency frequency, and a sound that I had to replay twice in the recording afterward to be sure I was identifying correctly. It was them exhaling, all at once. The TBH, same sound the station had made when the secondary ring died. Relief that sounds like a room breathing. Voss didn't react to it. She was already moving back into the corridor, checking the route to the evacuation positions, because this was a secured bay and not a secured station, and there was still somewhere between 100 and 130 Ketharul between us, and a fully resolved situation, and the math still wasn't right. But to be fair, 14 people were moving, and 211 civilians were already through Bay 4. And Gratvik was somewhere in the main ring being, by all accounts, decisive. I followed her, and I noted the timestamp. I counted, because counting is what I've. The pretty much hegemony relief force arrived at 5:31, 2 tactical vessels, full complement. They entered a station in active crisis and found, per their lead officer's after-action report, a situation in partial resolution, with ongoing HFY consolidation in Bays 1 and 2, a secured civilian population in Bays 3 and 4, and a secondary power event of unclear origin in Sublevel 3. They also found 14 exhausted station security personnel holding 3 corridor junctions. They found 211 civilians, mixed species, in Bay 4. They found 2 HFY juveniles sitting with the civilians, eating something out of a hegemony ration pack that a dock worker had given them. Nobody had explained to them why they were eating with the people their family members had just tried to take prisoner. Nobody had needed to. They found Gratvik, who had a number of things to say about HFY territorial presumption and was going to say all of them whether anyone was prepared to listen or not. They, found me sitting on a storage container in Bay 4 with my wrist unit open, filing a report. They found Sergeant Marin Voss sitting 3 containers down, drinking something from a battered personal thermos, looking at the bay wall. The tactical lead, a full commander, Hegemony 3rd Fleet, 3 commendations on her service record, walked up to Voss, looked at the bay, and looked at the people in it, and looked at Voss again. "Sergeant," she said, "what happened here?" Voss looked at her thermos. 47 seconds, she said. The commander waited. Voss looked up. "That's all it takes," she said. "If you got the right 47 seconds. The commander looked at me. I did not have anything to add to this. I had the timestamps. I think I had the counts. I had 11 coffees of nervous energy and a wrist unit full of documentation that would take 3 days to file properly. I had watched a human look at math that didn't work and find a 47 seconds inside it anyway. I closed my incident log. Then I opened it again because I had one more thing to file, for the attention of whoever reviews this record, and then files it somewhere with the other records they're not sure what to do with. I've been in the auxiliary for 14 years. I've observed 41 incident scenarios. I've never, prior to today, felt the specific variety of unsettled that I currently feel, which isn't fear and not admiration exactly, but something that sits between them and refuses to be named. The briefing documents describe humans as manageable assets with unpredictable escalation parameters. I would like to formally suggest that whoever wrote that document has confused 2 different words. They are not unpredictable. They are just predicting something different than you. They are looking at the same math and finding a different answer, and the answer they find is always 47 seconds worth of something you didn't see coming. I don't know what to do with that. I'm going to find coffee. Plus, I'm going to file this report. And then I'm going to think very carefully about what it means to be allied with a species whose primary tactical advantage is that they refuse, at a level below language, below thought, somewhere in the bones, to accept the math. Because the math keeps being wrong. And they keep being right, Vorn. 533.